This is Change the Narrative, the podcast about innovation in work, life, and culture. I'm your host and tour guide, Michael Hernandez. We're continuing our season about book authoring with a very special episode where we actually speak to an acquisitions editor from a publisher. Now, I know so far we've spoken with a bunch of writers and first-time authors about their process and their secrets to writing. But I think one of the big pieces and one of the big mysteries about book authoring is what are publishers looking for, specifically when they sign authors to join forces. And so this is a great episode where we're going to answer all those questions for you about what your manuscript should look like, how to prepare to work with an editor, what you should reasonably expect of working with a publisher, and all those other questions. So stick around. I'm really excited to speak with Valerie Witte, who is a writer and editor, and she is currently a senior acquisitions editor at the International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE, where she works with educators to develop books covering a range of edtech topics, from computer science to digital citizenship, STEAM learning, artificial intelligence, and more. She is also a poet and author of multiple poetry and hybrid collections. She has been active in the small press poetry community for years and has served as a member of the Kelsey Street Press, which publishes feminist experimental writing, and Arley Press, which focuses on publishing poetry from the Pacific Northwest. And with that, let's dive into our conversation with Valerie Witte. Valerie Witte, it is so great to see you and have you on the show. I'm really excited to talk with you about editing books and working with authors on their first books. And you and I know each other because I worked with you and your publishing house, ISTE. And so had a great experience working with you and your team on the project. So really glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you actually are an author yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about what kind of writing you do?
Sure. So I'm primarily a poet and I write experimental poetry and also what I would call like hybrid work. So work that crosses into multiple genres, kind of hard to categorize. And so I have a few books. My latest project is a collection of experimental essays that I wrote in collaboration with another writer. Her name's Sarah Rosenthal. And for that project, we studied the work of two postmodern dancer choreographers, Simone Forti and Yvonne Rainer. We studied their work and we selected themes from their work, and then we paired one of those themes with a personal memory of our own involving dance. So we have a collection of 10 essays which combine these themes and our memories. So fairly elaborate project. And so that book is coming out early next year.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love experimental anything. I love poetry as well, so I'm not so knowledgeable. I might miss on some of the advantages of your experimental poetry. I'm just trying to wrap my head around just regular poetry, but that sounds really exciting. It sounds like it's sort of like, I don't know, the balance in your life, because I feel like maybe book editing is maybe more logistics and more technical in nature, and maybe that kind of keeps your creative side going as well. Is that a fair
Yeah, that's a
assessment?
really astute point. When I earlier on in my career, I think I was more interested in editing more creative work, but then I gravitated towards more technical publishing for various reasons. And so that's what I'm working on now. But I actually really like the balance now of having like the more technical editing or working on books and products that relate to technology. And then I have my like kind of wacky, poetic, experimental, artsy side. So it kind of evens out and balances. And yeah, like you said, it kind of, to me, kind of frees my brain to still work on the creative work, kind of more on the side. And then in my day job, it's a little more formal and technical, which I really enjoy that as well. So.
Wow, that's wild. That's really great. So how did you get into book editing?
Well, very early on in my career. So my first job out of college was basically a proofreader at a medical journals publisher in St. Louis, which is where I'm from. And so then from there, I moved to California and I got a job at a public affairs forum working on their publications, interning really. And then was able to get an editorial assistant position at a computer science book publisher. So I have like never turned back. I've been in book publishing ever since. So that was over 20 years ago. So I've been working in editorial pretty much my whole career. So yeah.
Wow, that's wild. And what do you like best about that job?
Well, I think especially where I work now at ISTE, I am let me rephrase this. Um, Especially where I work now at ISTE, I get to work with great educators like yourself all the time. And so I think that's honestly like my favorite part of the job is to get to work with people that are really passionate about learning and helping their students learn as well. And then I find that very fulfilling as an editor too, because I get to help people grow into their publishing role and become published authors as well. So I feel like it's very satisfying. And then I have a great team that I work with. We have a small but mighty books team, and I just enjoy working with them. We collaborate on projects every day, and so I just find working with them is very fun and fulfilling as well.
That's great. Yeah. So ISTE, ISTE, merged with ASCD a couple years ago, and they had a publishing arm as well. So I'm sort of curious, what does that publishing arm look like, either separately or jointly? Just like how many books do you guys publish annually, and is it all education books?
Yeah, they're all education oriented. We work somewhat separately at this point, kind of as separate imprints, I would say. But they do all kinds of education, more curriculum oriented books. Ours do tend to have more of a technology basis and focus. They have a bigger program than we do. I think they publish around 30 titles a year, and we publish more like 12 to 15. But yeah, we do work somewhat closely together. We share like cover ideas, title ideas. Sometimes we do co-publications. We kind of brainstorm things together. So we work kind of in tandem, but they're still somewhat separate as kind of publishing imprints as well.
How does that compare to like other publishers? Like I have no idea. Like I mean, obviously there's like really, really big ones out there, but I'm just sort of curious where you guys fit and how does that compare to what else is out there?
There's so many different types and different sizes of publishers and everything. And I've pretty much only worked with in education publishing. So as far as that goes, I mean, I used to work for Pearson, which is like I think the biggest education publisher in the world. So they've got like tens of thousands of staff. So we only have, total at ISTE, ASCD is about, I think, 150 or so. And the books teams are relatively small. So we're pretty small, I would say, overall. But I would say for ed tech, like ISTE does have a lot of um, credibility in the field, and we're known as a good source for that. And ASCD has been around for I think over 80 years, so they have like a great sterling reputation as well for mostly curriculum development. Um, and in terms of just structurally, it's very common for publishers to have what are called different imprints. So like you might have just a different strand of publishing within a publishing company. So it's kind of how we're operating now, but they're not formally structured that way right now. And I don't know if there'll be further merging or, I think there's still going to be some shifting as a company continue to grow together. So we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So imprints of having like different branches of this underneath the same umbrella of a large publisher. Maybe that's something for folks to think about too, is like you don't just go to like Penguin, you go to like there's like subsets and things like that. And is
Yeah,
there
they're
a
kind of like
different
different
philosophy and
brands.
sorry?
They're kind of like different brands within the same company. And they might have a different like approach or mindset. At a previous job I had, we had an imprint called Voices That Matter, and it was really author driven. So it was like driven by what like quote unquote like rock star authors, visionaries in the field. That was more photography, creative arts kind of publishing. And then we had other imprints that were more like really straightforward instructional, like how to make websites and things like that. So there were different imprints for kind of different goals within the program.
Mhm. That's cool. Okay, good to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm sort of curious to share with the audience, like just sort of like the logistics and the overall scope and span of a book project. And I wonder, in a nutshell, if you could kind of lay out the roadmap of a process from start to finish for a potential author. Like, let's say I have an idea, and how do I get that idea? into an editor or a publishing house, all the way through printing and publishing and distribution? Just in a nutshell, what would that roadmap look like?
Sure. I think most publishers do have proposal guidelines, which you can generally find on their websites. So we do have that. ASCD also has that. And so the first step is the author submitting a book proposal, and then there's some kind of vetting process at any publishing house, I'm sure. And so then there's what we do is there's some, discussion within our team. We also do a peer review where we solicit feedback from community leaders and people in the field, and discuss that with authors, have them revise the proposal. Once we're all agreed and ready to move forward, then we issue the offer and contract to the author. And then at some point that we agree on, the author usually submits a complete draft of the manuscript. Some publishers do that differently. Some would do maybe like one chapter at a time. It just really varies. And we sometimes do that too, depending on how the author wants to manage it. And so then there's the editing process, and then which we manage all of the various steps. So there's editing, and then there's the layout of the book, there's proofreading, indexing, and then printing, which is part of the production process. And then marketing, which I know we'll discuss later. But yeah, so that's kind of the whole shebang in a nutshell.
Wow. And give me a sense of like how long it takes for each of those steps. I mean, obviously, if you're writing something, it's however long it takes you to write it, but what's the time span that we should expect for that
With
process?
our books, we have a pretty fast turnaround in part because we're working on technology books, and of course, that subject matter changes very quickly. So we try to get the books done pretty quickly. So usually from the time an author submits a complete draft, it's usually about 7 or 8 months to publication. The editing definitely varies, but I would say probably 6 to 8 weeks total for editing. Um, Layout usually can happen pretty quickly. So there's usually like a couple weeks for editing, or sorry, a couple of weeks for layout, a couple of weeks for proofing, a week for indexing, things like that. Printing does take some time, usually 2 to 3 months for the printing and inventorying and fulfillment process, to get everything and to make sure Amazon has the books and all of that. Um, so yeah, it's pretty quick. I know on our end, I think ASCD's schedules are a little slower. I think their subject matter is a little different and it's a little more evergreen, so they sometimes take longer to develop their products, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, that's interesting to hear because my book took 2 years to do, and so I must be like the slow poke, and everyone's kind of wringing their hands,
Well,
going,
I'm
"Did we
talking
make a
about
mistake?"
from delivering the manuscript. I don't think it took that long.
I have in my mind that it took 2 years from the time I signed the contract until I delivered the final manuscript, but maybe I'm just like traumatized, and I think it took longer than it actually did. I don't know.
I think you had a very thorough editor as well.
I did. I did. She was great. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, okay, so we'll get into the specifics of editing a little bit later, but a lot of people out there, these days are choosing to self-publish. And I'm curious, like I had my own reasons for going with a publisher as opposed to self-publishing, and I'm curious if you could share some reasons why someone would choose one versus the other.
Yeah, I've never self-published myself, and I don't really know that much about it. But I mean, I guess the main advantages are autonomy. You have full control over what you're publishing and how and when, and you control all the content. So I do think that can be very valuable. Um, and what a publisher can offer, of course, are all the very professional services. So professional editing. We have professional book designers that I think do a great job, designing and laying out our books. And that also really key is our distribution. And so that's any major publisher has a lot of levers they can pull to get the book out in the world, getting it, out to Amazon. We sell books on our website. We can sell books somewhat internationally. We have several dozens of other resellers that also are distributing our books at any time. So that's probably the biggest advantage in addition to just the professional, editing and production services
Mhm.
that we provide. So I'm as you can probably tell, I've worked in publishing my whole career, so I'm a little biased, but I do like traditional publishing. In general, I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, I think for me, as a first-time writer, like I just didn't know all the parts, and I really wanted to focus my energy on the book and the writing. Clearly, I did a lot of marketing and stuff as well, and that's a whole other ball of wax and a ton of time to take up. So, but I think for me, like the other thing too was when I went to ask for blurbs, like people to write blurbs, I could say, "Hey, I'm working with a publisher. I'm not just a rando who's just decided I've got a crazy idea and I'm going to self-publish, but I also have this publisher has like I know something like 80,000 members worldwide, and they're like, oh, like my idea, my name is going to get out there and be distributed. So, I think there's definitely advantages to doing that as well. Um, so can you tell me a little bit about the editing process? What's the relationship like generally between an editor and an author?
Well, of course, that can vary a lot as well, depending on the publishing house and the author. But I would say in general, I mean, the editor is there to support the author every step of the way. Writing a book, as you can attest, can be an overwhelming process. So I think that, but as we editors, we've worked on so many books and done the process so many times. So just like being there for support for the author, we obviously help from the very early stages, sometimes very much in the proposal stage of helping, especially with the outline. I feel like I'm really big on having a really good, clear, thorough outline before the writing even starts. So I think the editor can really help a lot with building that, helping the author build that. And then, yeah, relatedly helping with the organization of the book, developing the content. There's other things that we do too, like sometimes our authors bring on contributors to write examples or share their stories. Sometimes we help them find contributors, so that depending on if they have that network or not. Um, helping fill in gaps of the manuscript, especially developmental editors, which sometimes we do, sometimes we hire freelancers. That's like a really high level editing process at the very beginning where you're overseeing the structure, making sure everything's complete, makes sense, and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So anyway, just like every step of the way, trying to support the author and developing the book and getting it to be the best that it can be.
Yeah, I mean, working with my editor staff, that was really great. I mean, she was, technical and logistical depending on where I was. Some nice perspective, sometimes a life coach,
Yep.
things like that. So can you maybe tell us like what are the different kinds of editors and because there's different kinds and what they do specifically?
Yeah, I guess I'll talk about three main types. So my official title is I'm an acquisitions editor. And so what that basically means is that I'm the person who contracts with the author to sign the books with us. Most acquisitions editors, I believe, at least in my experience, you also do other forms of editing, but that's like kind of your key role. So another type of editor is the developmental editor, which I just mentioned. So that is like a really high level, kind of bird's eye view of the manuscript. You look and make sure all the structural elements are there and make sense, and that, I mean, how I think of it is like each section of a chapter needs to support the theme of that chapter, and that each chapter needs to support the theme of the book. And so just looking at this in a very holistic way, and just, also, like I said, like if there's sections of the book that just seem incomplete or something, or there's ideas that are not fully fleshed out, the developmental editor will tackle those items. And then there's the copy editor, which I think is probably what most people think of when they think of editing, which is like line by line, word by word, grammatical, punctuation errors, things like that, making sure this, probably every publisher has like a house style. So you have either a standard, Chicago manual of style or something like a style guideline that you use, but even within each publishing house, you have different, like people spell words differently, or maybe you capitalize internet or you don't, or things like that. So making sure all those styles are consistent throughout, that would be a copy editing task as well. So those are I would say the three main types of editing.
Okay. And what should an author expect to rely on an editor to do? Obviously, there's like the copy editing, which is like grammatical, but before that, like working with Steph, my editor, like what should they expect to have to do themselves, and what should they expect to rely on for the editor, or does it kind of depend on the relationship and the project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably does vary, but I think again, I think like you mentioned life coach, I think that the editor is often just a coach in general. So whether it's like whatever, if it's like more of like a supportive emotional support, but also um just encouraging the author to like share their insights and kind of maybe draw that out of them. And with our approach is pretty informal in our books. Like we like our books to be conversational and we want the author's voice to be heard. They're not, I wouldn't say super formal and technical in terms of the writing. So we try to like encourage that. I'm pretty much always encouraging authors, just like, you don't have to be overly formal and overly academic with the writing and just kind of, yeah, encourage them to be more conversational. Um, and yeah, I think my approach is not to be too like dictatorial in do it this way, but just like how about that? You just make suggestions or ask questions. And then I mean, I think it generally works out well that way where it's very collaborative. And so um, ideally, at least in our experiences with ISTE, it's been positive where people are able to express their ideas and get them out clearly. I mean, the editor's main job is probably to yeah get the ideas out in the clearest way possible so that the reader can follow the content well.
Okay. Sure, that's that second set of eyes, professional from a distance, 30,000 foot views. It's going to work because it's going to fly. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. Okay, so let's say I'm a new author and I want to work with a publisher. What are publishers looking for when they select authors? Because they don't choose everybody, they don't offer contracts to everyone. So, what are some of the things that a publisher might be looking for?
Well, I think generally most publishers are looking for people that have some kind of following or presence. Often at this day and age, it's probably some kind of online presence, like on social media. Um, it's great as someone, I mean, this probably used to be more of a thing, but someone who's a blogger who's like, you can tell they can write and they know their content area and they know their audience. That's really helpful. We look for people who are very active speakers who go to industry events and speak on their topics. Um, so I guess those are the main things. Just having some kind of presence and ideally having writing ability would be ideal. So if they've written a book before or again can at least or maybe written articles for like industry outlets and things like that that they can share with us, that's helpful. It can also help. We don't really require sample chapters necessarily when we do proposals, but ASCD I think does, and that's also pretty common. So as long as you can see that the person has some writing chops, that's also really helpful. We don't really expect people to be like, the next Hemingway or something because we're working with teachers who are talking about technology, so we're comfortable doing a lot of editorial support. But obviously being able to write is very helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, okay. So I hear you saying a following, experience and evidence of writing, a track record, of that is very helpful to you. Have you ever accepted someone who doesn't have that? Oh, maybe before social media, but, could somebody just come in without a big following? I think most people probably don't. So other than their friends and family, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it really varies again across publishers. I think with ISTE, we've been somewhat mission driven for at least many years. And so we have definitely signed projects that were kind of more driven by the content. But we also have authors who have turned out to be best-selling authors and that don't really have social media or like a big name. They have amazing content or they're teaching in an academic institution that adopts their framework or things like that. So there are different ways to get to be successful. And and so yeah, we have it's been it's interesting to observe being here because like I would say like half of our authors that sell really well, it's partly due to their internet following and whatnot. But then the other half don't have anything in there of that nature, but their books are really great and they've been able to catch on in, an academic environment or they've been adopted in courses or things like that. So they develop momentum over years. And some of those have been made into second and third editions too. So
Yeah.
I would definitely say it's a mix for us.
Okay. All right, cool. So, I mean, obviously, the book business is a business and it's there to make money. As great as our ideas might be, as life-changing as the ideas might be. And so I'm curious, is there something else going on behind the scenes, behind the curtain that publishers are thinking about? Like, obviously, you don't want to just do the same book that's already out there, but what are some of like the market forces that, come into play when making decisions about an author or their project?
Excuse me. Um, Let me think about how to answer that. I mean, I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but we definitely look at industry trends and think of like, for example, with our space of ed tech, what are the hot kind of trending ed tech topics? Of course, that changes every year or two. There's something new on the horizon or newly emergent that comes up. So I think that's something we definitely look at, and we're looking to fill a market gap. So if someone presents a book to us or a topic that we don't have any books on and there isn't much on the market yet, that's an opportunity maybe to move forward with something. Um, I mean, this is probably kind of obvious right now, but AI has become a really big deal over the past couple of years. And so that's been interesting. So we have been publishing some AI-oriented products, and we also get a lot of proposals on AI and on AI. So it's you're kind of vetting through those, and also, you have to be very selective so that you don't oversaturate your list with things that are too with books that are too similar or have too much overlap. So I think that is something that I'm not sure all authors are aware of, is that every time we consider a book, we have to make sure it fits in our list and isn't gonna kind of cannibalize another book that we have, but that will that we can co-promote related titles though. Like that's a really good approach. And you can certainly have more than one book on a similar topic, but they have to have a different approach or maybe a slightly different audience, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was speaking at South by Southwest EDU a couple of years ago, and two publishers come approached me about working with them, and had conversations with them, and I decided not to go with either of them, but or one of them I did. And I just waited and I didn't have my idea yet. And I took my time. And by the time I was ready, I went back to them like maybe a year later. They're like, oh, we already have a book for storytelling, and you're thinking like, dang it. Like I felt like, dang, I missed my chance. But of course, I saw that book and it was written by a friend of mine actually, and it's great, but it's very different than my take on it. So it's sort of interesting that the publisher at the time had their library filled with that niche, but I found another place that I'm very happy with to go
Okay.
to and still do it. So sort of interesting to sort of keep that in mind, and maybe that's advice for future authors is strike while the iron's hot. You got the idea, just do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think something that like some advice that I would give is to just look at the publisher's catalog and just see like what kinds of books do they publish, and B, make sure your book is different enough and, isn't gonna completely overlap with something. Because if that happens a lot. Like I would say the majority of our proposals, people don't seem to be familiar with our catalog, or maybe they know one book from our catalog, but not the others. So I think like it's impressive to us when we get a proposal that shows that the author's done their homework and they know who the publisher is, they know the content that we publish, they know the list. It does take extra work, of course, to do that. But if an author does their homework in that way, it definitely gets our attention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's important. Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned this a little while ago. What does an author need to be prepared for or come to a publisher with in advance? Like, do you need to write an entire book? Do you need to have sample chapters? I know some publishers like to see that. Do you need to have like a table of contents outline for the entire book? What does a potential author need to provide you before you can sit down with them?
Well, in our case, and I think most cases, you do not need to have a whole book. That's pretty unusual. We really just require a proposal, and we have proposal guidelines on our website that definitely does include a table of contents. That's one of the most important elements you can have, and then a description of the concept of the book. Excuse me. Um, and then there's various other questions in there. One of the most important things is like an analysis of the competing titles. So we always ask authors um, to research what other titles are on the market and to explain how their book is similar or different or how it's better than other books. And then give us like marketing ideas of how they can support the marketing. So there's various elements that go into the proposal. Um, but I think in answering the proposal questions effectively is more important, in my opinion, than just seeing a whole book. Because we want to see that people are, again, have some familiarity with who we are and have kind of done a little bit of research of what we require. Um, and then there was another part of your question. Oh, the sample chapters. Yeah, so we don't currently require sample chapters, but we do recommend it. It's very helpful to have. So I think that varies across the industry. Some publishers require those, and we recommend it. And sometimes if we're reviewing a proposal, we don't feel like we have quite enough information to go on, we do ask for sample chapters or at least an excerpt of the book to see how the outline would like play out in reality of the actual, chapter content.
Yeah, I think I actually wrote at least one chapter that never ended up using, but it was just to kind of prove myself that I'm ready to go, right? I can do this, and the table of contents as well, which is kind of interesting. We'll get into later about revisions and stuff. But so okay, so what do you see as like some of the biggest mistakes new authors make, or some of the biggest challenges that they face when they go through the entire process of writing?
Well, I don't know about mistakes, but I think challenges, I mean, I think just staying on track with a very somewhat overwhelming deadline of like, you have to write 40,000 words or something, that can be overwhelming. And so I think just people often struggle with that, especially if they haven't written a book before. Um, so I think that that's probably the main challenge and just, running up against a deadline and not making that on time. Um, and so, I mean, I think there's some ways to help with that. The editor can help set up a writing schedule for an author, and just kind of have maybe every 3 or 4 weeks you have a chapter due or something like that. So that's one way that to avoid that challenge, or to like at least help alleviate it.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I mean, what I'm going to ask you, what do you think were our challenges that
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm a slow writer, so it took me a long time to do it. I mean, you have the outline and you write to the outline and things like that. But I found that I was oftentimes my biggest challenge was getting lost. So had written a bunch of blogs before. I was very familiar with writing on deadline. I feel very comfortable with my writing style, but I just had never done something of this scope and scale before. And so I kind of got lost in the material and I would, like I said, it took me like, 18 months to write the manuscript. And then 6 months in, I keep repeating myself because I forgot that I wrote this, you know, 3 months ago. And is this deja vu or did I actually do this? Did I dream this or did it actually happen? And you have your outline, but I think especially with my content, there was a lot of overlap and chances for, touching base and going back and linking to things that were said earlier. And so it was sort of an interconnected web. And so for me, it was just sort of like keeping it all straight and not being redundant. So there are many times I just remember scrolling back and forth on the Google Doc, just like, where am I? What's going on? And so for me, that was my biggest challenge, I think.
Yeah, and I guess with that, I think again, that's part of the editor's job is to help like identify when they're reading it because of course they have fresh eyes that they
Hmm.
haven't been like mired in the content so
Yes.
much and working in that mode for this content area so well. So someone who's just kind of freshly looking at it can be like, oh, this content sounds familiar, and so they can hopefully help you. I'm sure that your editor did,
Yeah.
like identify areas of repetition or overlap. And then sometimes some repetitions fine or good, and you can be like, as I said in chapter 3 on et cetera,
Hmm.
and then you can elaborate on it. But you want it to be intentional and have the flow and be connected and in
Hmm.
yeah, in a thoughtful way.
Hmm.
Um, that is interesting. I guess I haven't written in a book in that way because I either write poems or I write like these essays that are very discrete. So
Yeah.
each one has a very specific topic. But I see what you're saying that you could just kind of forget if you've already talked about something in a different part of the book. So
Yeah. And I think also speaking of that time frame, that span of time, 18 months is a long time and my style would change. And so depending on how I was feeling that day, my writing style would be different. It'd be like more aggressive one day, more, contemplative another day. And so the style sort of shifted. And I feel like that's great to have the editor too, because they can come in and see that and go like level it out and make it
Mhm.
consistent. So for me, that was really, and then also I went over, I had like 80,000 words or something. And so she's like, you
Thought
got to
that
cut
was
this in
what
half.
happened.
You got to cut this in half. And I'm like, oh, but it was actually a really great exercise in economy. So I'd make the experience for the reader a lot better. So it was
That
actually
does happen more often than I expect it to, that someone writes literally twice as much as the as the goal. And which I find fascinating because again, I write poetry that's like in fragments. So to write that much
yeah,
is very impressive in a way. But
yeah,
but I
yeah.
mean the good thing is it's much easier to edit down too much content than it is to like develop and have an
Mhm.
author who writes very little content and you have to keep developing it and drawing more out and doing more
Mhm.
research and etc. So yeah, starting long and winnowing it down is actually better, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a pretty wild process to think I wrote too much, but it also made now that I go back to blogging. Or writing articles for ASCD and stuff, it's so much easier now because I've like usually before you're like, oh my God, I gotta write like 1,200 words, that's a lot, or like 3,000 words, that's a lot. It's like it's not 40,000. You've done 40,000 or more, then you're like, oh, that's a snap, right? I can manage it now. So it really helped me, my brain and my writing brain kind of manage my other projects in my life too. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think like a big part of the process of publishing a book is marketing, right? Getting it out there. It's like if the book falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it actually get written? And so there's a lot of debate or question about, the marketing and maybe the same thing for the music industry too. Like, what is the publisher responsible for? And is that maybe based on the contract, or is there sort of a general expectation of what can an author expect the publisher to do to market the book and get it out into the world? And how much is on the author to publish and to market that?
Well, we always think of it as a partnership, and so we work with the author on both the actual content of the book, but also on the marketing strategy and plan and work. And some of the things that we do, which I think are, I would say, fairly standard. We do, social media support. Of course, we send out promotional emails, so like emails to people that have purchased
Mhm.
our books before. We have a catalog for our books, so we would include books in our catalog. We do some media outreach, so trying to secure interviews or reviews for our books.
Mhm.
So those are the kinds of things that we typically do. If the author has connections to any of those, outlets or their own community and can help get the word out, that's really helpful, of course. And one thing that we try to do is if the author can keep us informed of their activities, so if they're like
Mhm.
speaking at a conference, and then we can help amplify those opportunities, or like does a webinar that's publicly available or something like that, we can amplify through our
Mhm.
social media and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, And then I think you mentioned, getting Amazon blurbs can be helpful. So that's something that the editor usually works directly with the author to get suggestions of people that we can query for reviews. Um, so, I mean, Amazon's just going to be realistically the way that many people find out about books. And so so we do try to get people to do reviews there if we can. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that we do. And yeah, it is kind of it's a collaborative thing. It is a partnership. And so just the better that the author and editor can work together and our marketing manager as well.
Mhm.
Um, and that process can start kind of at any point, although it's usually fairly late in the writing and editing process where like the
Mhm.
marketing really ramps up. Um,
Mhm.
so that's kind of a quick overview of how we manage marketing.
Yeah, so I feel like I hear this from a lot of folks too. They're like, "Gosh, I'm like have this contract, and they're a big publisher, and I expected more marketing, and they don't get what they expected." And I mean, you're not, a super famous author yet, so you can't really expect that. But so for me, I was expecting that, and I started marketing even before I started writing, and building the audience. Like this podcast, for example, came about because I was trying to build audience before I wrote the book. And, I have this podcast evolved out of a newsletter that I still publish. Um, and I feel like, I think maybe authors need to think about like you have your connections in your community and professional networks, and so you want to leverage that. But for me, what was helpful is, the industry connections that you guys had. So, for example, I got a really great review in the school library journal, which a lot of people read. And so that was helpful. Um, help with the Amazon piece. And so that was really helpful, things that I wouldn't have the connection for. So for the marketing, I think authors need to realistically be prepared to do some of their own marketing. And we're going to talk about that in a future episode and some online content that I'm working on too. So very excited about that. Okay, so it's a wonderful, amazing process. It's like birthing a child, I guess. I'm not a woman, so I don't know what that experience is like exactly. I have a daughter, but
Books for
did
my
not come out of
baby.
my body. But this book kind of did, and I feel like you kind of forget the pain and suffering when you have it in hand and you can smell it and you can hand it to people and autograph it and people buy it and pick it up and are excited to read it. It's really exciting and very, very rewarding. So, but book writing and authoring is not for everybody. What would you recommend if somebody was debating whether or not they should write a book? Should everybody write a book? And how should they make that decision about if they're going to do it or not?
I mean, I guess I'm just very open about this kind of thing, and I'm obviously a creative person, so I just feel like if you have something to say, then and you feel like you have a book in you, then just go for it. I mean, there's no harm that can be done, and even like just the process of writing a book, or it doesn't even have to be a whole book, but just writing is just a very generative, creative process anyway, and just getting your ideas out can be helpful. Um, so yeah, I don't think I would ever say someone like shouldn't write a book if they have ideas to share or, something that they want to say. I think just like go for it. I don't know.
That's great. Any final words of advice or encouragement for potential authors?
I mean, I think people just, again, I've said this a few times, but it can be an overwhelming task. And so I think just like try not to stress out about it too much. If it's something that people are passionate about and excited to do, it can also take, like you said, it can take a long time to do it. It doesn't have to happen in 3 months or whatever. So just like be patient with yourself.
Valerie, this has been a great conversation and really enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing your insights as an editor.
Thanks for having me.
That was a fantastic conversation with Valerie Witte. I hope you picked up a lot of great tips and ideas for working with a publisher in this episode. And I feel that in combination with our earlier episode, speaking with another editor, Stephanie Argy, I think you're prepared to take your ideas to a publisher. So with that, you can find links to Valerie's resources and her own books on the show notes for this episode, and more resources for writing and authoring on my website, storytellingwithpurpose.com, including a link to an upcoming webinar about first-time authors. So with that, happy writing, and we'll see you next time.